The 10 supernaturals had yet to lift their jaws from the ground. Esther of course explained the procedure and warned them beforehand, but somehow witnessing with your own eyes as someone walked into a fireplace, stepped up to the fire that turned into a peculiar venomous green, rose higher and subsequently engulfed said person's entire form before vanishing completely. It was a sight to behold, and the 7 vampires and lone hybrid couldn't suppress their violent flinch at the mere thought, and for some, the memory, of fire licking their skin along with the excruciating pain that ensued. The flue fire is more of a tickle to them, Esther stated in an amused voice upon seeing the 8 of them flinch in unison that looked almost rehearsed. Still, knowing that it was harmless, Klaus felt his heart clench once Venus imitated Alex and cried out what was supposed to be diagonally, but ended up being diagonally before disappearing in flames. The 10 supernaturals and Esther were swiftly transported just in time to watch Venus in elegant tumble out of the fireplace. Her entire form was covered in soot and her honey blonde curls were stained black, prompting Rebecca and Caroline to wrinkle their nose. Venus groaned and dusted herself off as her emerald orbs inspected her surroundings, and as they widened in alarm, the 10 supernaturals and Esther knew something was amiss. Frowning in perplexity, Elijah spoke up, "This is not diagonally." Elena, however, adopted a revolted expression, a finger pointing at a particular object. "Is that a hand? And those there?" She pointed at another object on the counter. "Those are human bones." Cole's interest was piqued and he mimicked Lena by scoping their surroundings, abruptly halting at a shelf. "These cards are blood-stained. Where the bloody hell did Venus end up in? This place looks like a house of horrors," Jeremy grimaced. Klaus snapped his eyes closed and pinched the bridge of his nose in an effort to calm down his nerves and soothe his worries, forget about his amplified traits upon transitioning into a vampire. With his werewolf side no longer dormant, Klaus was easily angered. Even traveling to a shopping district ended up being dangerous for Venus. Could she catch a break? Esther sighed, quickly quelling the others' fears. Venus did not speak clearly when she traveled by flue, so she ended up in Nocturne Alley. It is not too far from Diagon. However, it is a dangerous alley filled with dark and nefarious wizards and illegal trading. Unfortunately, just as a collective sigh of relief was going around when Venus's hand went to grab the door handle to escape the morbid store, Draco Malfoy appeared in the way, prompting the little girl to ensconce herself in a large black cabinet, leaving a small crack to peer through. Bonnie's eyebrows rose on their own accord when a man followed Draco into the store, a man who shared the same pale, pointed face, but had long blonde hair that reached his shoulders and cold, gray eyes. "I'm guessing that's Malfoy Sr." "He's hot," Caroline blurted out, and when everyone gaped at her, she shrugged. "Hey, I'm just stating the facts." "He is hot." Rebecca, Elena and Bonnie remained still for a moment, before all 3 of them nodded in agreement, prompting the men to roll their eyes in exasperation, and in Klaus and Damon's case, irritation. "Touch nothing, Draco," Malfoy Sr. called out in a stern, cold voice. Draco, who had reached for the glass eyes, frowned and said, "I thought you were going to buy me a present." "I said I would buy you a racing broom," Malfoy Sr. offhandedly said while drumming his hands on the counter. Malfoy adopted a sulky disposition and started to rant. "What's the good of that if I'm not on the house team? Venus Potter got a Nimbus 2000 last year. Special permission from Dumbledore so she could play for Gryffindor. She's not even that good, it's just because she's famous for having a stupid scar on her forehead." Rebecca sneered at the blonde ponce and drowned out the rest of his whining. "Somebody's jealous. He's practically green with envy, the little slime. Besides, I doubt Venus enjoys being famous for the death of her parents and becoming an orphan," Stefan scoffed, his forest green eyes narrowing in distaste at Malfoy Jr. "You have told me this at least a dozen times already," Mr. Malfoy shot a quelling look at his son, "and I would remind you that it is not prudent to appear less that fond of Venus Potter, not when most of our kind regard her as the hero who made the Dark Lord disappear, Mr. Borgin. There's something dangerous about the elder Malfoy, Elijah mused out loud. Esther chose to inform them. He served Voldemort. He was a Death Eater, but he managed to evade imprisonment after his downfall. Her words produced uproar between the 10 supernaturals, and they impatiently waited with bated breaths for the 2 Malfoys to depart the store and conclude whatever business they had with the greasy man behind the counter who looked as though he shared a relation to Snape. The scene forwarded slightly and they all shadowed Venus as she ran out of the store and down a dark, gloomy and forbidding alley, watching in fury as a few stragglers tried approaching her. If they so much as touch her. Klaus left the thread hanging, his fists clenching in anger to mask his fear. Venus. What do you think you're doing down there? Oh, thank God. Elena sighed out in relief. It was quite comical to watch Hagrid's massive form loom over everyone and grab Venus away from the alley. And they all calmed down as they appeared in the colorful and cheerful Diagon Alley. Thanks Hagrid, Venus beamed up at her huge friend. Stupid flute powder. Anyways, what are you doing in Nocturne? She pouted when Hagrid ignored her at first as he tried brushing soot off of her so forcefully she was nearly knocked into a barrel of dragon dung. I was looking for a flesh-eaten slug repellent. They're ruining the school cabbages. You're not on your own? Rebecca's eyes glistened with happy tears. I like Hagrid. He obviously cares a lot for my niece. Klaus calmed down completely when the Russos approached Venus and Hagrid, and everyone couldn't help but be amused by Teresa Russo's frantic rambling about Nocturne Alley and how dangerous it is, especially when Alex and Max voiced their wistfulness in regards to visiting the forbidding alley. The scene changed, and they found themselves in the bookshop standing behind Venus, Neville, Alex and her 2 brothers while the elder Russos went to pay for the books. Cole scowled at the Estrogen Fest. What's with all the harlots clamoring around? Cole. Esther chastised him. Cole sheepishly grinned. What? Look at them. They're all swooning sickeningly over that blonde man with blinding teeth. Oh look, the twin pranksters. I do like them. He quickly changed the subject as Fred and George Weasley separated from the flock of redheads and approached the troublous threesome with wide smiles. Unfortunately, before they could get a word in, the blonde wizard the females were all clamoring over, interrupted. It can't be Venus Potter? Hey! Carolyn, Elena and Bonnie shouted when Venus was grabbed and tossed to the stage next to the blonde. Klaus' eyes turned gold for a second and he gritted his teeth in anger. Nice big smile, Venus. Together you and I are worth the front page. Glaring at the blonde, Venus yanked herself away from his firm grip and stomped his feet. No thank you, Mr. Lockhart. You can't just grab people. Especially a minor. She snarled, smiling gratefully at Justin who tugged her back into the crowd, her words causing a hush before the crowd all started murmuring and Gilderoy Lockhart chuckled nervously, trying to save face. At a girl, Damon smirked. A fond smile appeared on Klaus' face. That is definitely something Booker would do. Rebecca grinned cheekily and looped her arm through Klaus, prompting a tearful smile to appear on Esther's face. How could she have been so blind for the past 1,000 years whilst on the other side? After that tool, Lockhart, announced that he was asked to be the defense against the dark arts professor, prompting annoyed groans. However, they didn't have time to state their ire as the scene changed to portray a confrontation between Venus and Malfoy Sr. that had them all reeling. Suddenly, they found themselves in the dungeons at Hogwarts staring at Venus and Alex, both of whom sported guilt-stricken faces, their heads bowed and their eyes boring a hole on the ground. Ah, what happened? We were just in the train station, Jeremy inquired in confusion. Esther sighed and stood in front of the 10 supernaturals to address them all. Venus and Alex couldn't get through the barrier to the Hogwarts Express. It was blocked for some reason, despite the fact that they had time before the train disembarked to Hogwarts. Alex managed to grab her family's flying carpet before leaving the house and came up with the brilliant suggestion that they fly to Hogwarts, Laughter interrupted her indignant speech, specifically from Cole, Damon, and Jeremy. They are currently in trouble. Suddenly, Esther's mahogany orbs glazed over, staring at something far off. A sad smile crossed her features and she approached her children, embracing them all in a tight hug while placing a motherly kiss on each of their foreheads. "I am afraid I am being summoned. Your guide shall materialize once I depart. I will be seeing you soon, my children. Goodbye." And before their very eyes, she vanished from their presence and the scene went into action, cutting them off from conversing amongst themselves. The door closed shut and Snape turned to look at them. "So, the train isn't good enough for the famous Venus Potter and her faithful sidekick, Russo. Wanted to arrive with a bang, did we, girls?" Simultaneously, Venus exclaimed, "No, sir, it was the barrier at King's Cross. It," and Alex snapped in offense, "Hey! Watch who you call sidekick." "Silence!" Snape coldly barked, instantly silencing them both. "What have you done with the carpet?" Defiant silence met his inquiry. Snape gritted his teeth and unrolled the Evening Prophet, slamming it on the table and hissed, "You were seen." He then showed them the headline, "Flying Carpet Mystifies Moles." 2 miles in London, convinced they saw a flying carpet over the post office tower. At noon in Norfolk, Mrs. Hetty Bayliss, while hanging out her washing, Mr. Angus Fleet, of Peebles, reported to the police. 6 or 7 miles in all. Flying carpets are illegal in magical Britain, he sharply concluded. Cole broke out into laughter as Snape left to summon Professor McGonagall and the headmaster. The 10 supernaturals were torn. Some, like Damon, Carolyn, and Jeremy, stifled their amusement concerning the situation, while others like Elena, Elijah, Stefan and Bonnie rolled their eyes at the other four's immaturity, and lastly, Klaus and Rebecca were vehemently concerned over Venus' punishment and worried over the few cuts and bruises she received from, apparently a homping willow, a tree that fights back, of all things. In fact, Cole's bout of laughter was only halted by a modulated, drawling voice curtly sounding out from behind them. "Cease and desist your nonsensical laughter, Mr. McAilson. It is no laughing matter. If it weren't for the fact that flying carpets were legal in America and the Russos had a registered license, they would have to pay a hefty fine or face incarceration." Suffice to say, the cocky original abruptly ceased laughing, and they all pivoted around to face the newcomer. The man was tall and exceedingly handsome in a noble sort of way, what with his raven black hair that brushed his shoulder blades and tied into a ponytail with an emerald green leather strap, and his round, emerald eyes, olive complexion, prominent cheekbones and hardened jaw. The man was a real looker and the 4 females had to force their jaws shut and suppress themselves from perceptibly swooning before they made a mockery out of themselves. And while he had a no-nonsense voice, his eyes were shining with mirth, contradicting his brusque words. "Are you a new guide?" Caroline hesitantly asked, thankful that she didn't stutter in front of the dashing man. A smirk crossed his features as he clasped both his hands behind his back and approached them. "Obviously. Your attention to detail truly astounds me, Miss Forbes." Caroline blushed, prompting the man's smirk to widen slightly, enough dilly-dallying around. "I am Salazar Slytherin. If you were concentrating on Venus first year, then you have presumed correctly that I am indeed one of the founders of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." "Cool," Jeremy gaped. Salazar smirked. "Well then, shall we reconvene with the memory?" And while it sounded like a question, it really wasn't. Of course, the 10 supernaturals wondered if they would meet the other 2 founders after Godric and Rowena, and Salazar seemed nothing like how they imagined him to be. He was brisk and to the point, but his eyes radiated mirth and his patent smirk spoke volumes of his rebellious attitude. They observed the headmaster and McGonagall chastise the 2 mischievous girls and the scenes began forwarding at a rapid rate, with Salazar adding a few derogatory and matter-of-fact comments in between. "Ah. Herbology. This is Helga's affinity. Concentrate on this lesson. 'Tis very important for the future," Salazar curtly informed them. Venus stood between Alex and Neville in the greenhouse as Professor Sprout demanded silence. "We'll be repotting mandrakes today. Now, who can tell me the properties of the mandrake?" The Troubles threesome rolled their eyes as Hermione's hand swiftly shot into the air. "Mandrake, or mandragora, is a powerful restorative. It is used to return people who have been transfigured or cursed to their original state." "Does she have to sound like she swallowed the textbook?" Venus murmured in annoyance. Alex and Neville snorted into their hands as Sprout awarded 10 points to Gryffindor. The mandrake forms an essential part of most antidotes. It is also, however, dangerous. "Who can tell me why?" Sprout ignored Hermione's hand, her kind eyes narrowing in on the Troubles threesome. "Mr. Longbottom?" Clearing his throat, he promptly replied, "The cry of the mandrake is fatal to anyone who hears it." "Seriously?" Bonnie's eyes gleamed with interest. During Venus' first year, they barely covered dangerous magical plants, and Bonnie was vehemently curious as to the other aspects of this magical world she was allowed to bear witness to. Salazar nodded sternly. "Earmuffs are essential when dealing with mandrakes, especially young ones such as those. Now, since we are merely spirits observing them, we shall not be affected by their cries, but it shall be a nuisance to hear." And on cue, the second years plugged in their earmuffs and yanked out their respective mandrakes. The 10 supernaturals gasped, eyes widening on the grotesque things. They were small, muddy and extremely ugly as they bawled at the top of their lungs. Rebecca wrinkled her nose and took a step back while rubbing her eardrums. "They look positively ghastly." "Yes, well, not everything resembles sunshine and rainbows, Miss McAilson," Salazar sniffed, his eyes focusing in on a Hufflepuff as he approached the Troubles threesome, ignoring Rebecca glowering at him. Her glare then traveled to Damon and Cole, both of whom were chuckling at her expense. "That Lockhart's something, isn't he?" The boy, Justin Finch Fletchley, happily commented, "Awfully brave chap. Have you read his books? I'd have died of fear if I'd been cornered in a telephone booth by a werewolf, but he stayed cool and—" Klaus ignored the foolish boy's ramblings and whipped around to face Salazar, who had a knowing grin. "A werewolf? Oh, yes. Werewolves in the magical community differ from the ones you have seen, and the other half of you that had been kept dormant for over 1,000 years." Salazar smirked, efficiently grabbing the 10 supernaturals' attention. "Your kind are inborn with the werewolf gene that has a trigger, originated by a voodoo priestess 1,700 years ago who created 7 progenitors of the 7 different bloodlines of werewolves that procreated many, until this very day where they continue to thrive and reproduce. Now, in the magical community, lycanthropy is more of a disease. It is not an inborn gene, but an infection. A curse. Individuals bitten by a magical werewolf in their wolfish form at the time of the full moon receive the curse and become a werewolf. When the werewolf's saliva mingles with the victim's blood, contamination will occur, and there is no cure, by magical or normal means. At least not yet." Klaus looked to be mulling it over. "That sounds quite curious." "Yes," he absently murmured, "most inborn werewolves are proud of their heritage and embrace their transformation." Salazar continued, his eyes taking in the change of scenery which was Lockhart's first lesson. "Magical werewolves, however, it is more of a death sentence thrust upon them. They become alienated from their community and peers, they are classified as naught but beasts and are even hunted." Thinking of Tyler, Caroline's expression was aghast. That's horrible." Salazar smirked at her, eyes gleaming with mirth. "Oh, don't be put off, Miss Forbes. Not everyone shares the same bigotry. Unlike most inborn wolves that embrace their transformation and become one with the wolf within, the magical ones have no control, and many have a right to fear them as it only takes one nip to be inflicted with a life of pain, poverty and alienation. Many magical werewolves purposely transform in front of humans, and target them. Therefore, they mostly have themselves to blame for being hunted and exiled." watching Lockhart blatantly suck up to Venus and teach them plain rubbish. The 10 supernaturals and Salazar mostly remained silent as scene after scene materialized before their eyes, the most infuriating one being Draco Malfoy buying his way into the Slytherin Quidditch team, until they finally found themselves shadowing the Troubles' threesome to nearly headless Nick's death day party during the Halloween feast.